Let's look at characteristics of a useful system. So first of all, we have to reference useful to what? Useful to human beings. Useful for what? Useful for the underlying drive to increase sustainable well-being and minimize unnecessary chronic suffering. So the first thing all systems have to be is intelligent. And by intelligent, what I mean is they have to increase the yield of predictable statistical well-being over the alternative. So if you have $1 and you have an hour of time and you have a forest, there you are. How much sustainable well-being comes out of that unit of energy? $1, an hour, out in nature in the forest. You can wander around aimlessly. You can go inward. You can look outward. You can try and harvest firewood. There are infinite numbers of things that you can do without any particular system. Though if you really have no system, no impulse to be productive, that's a system. That's a system of productivity. No definition of value, that's a system, a hierarchy of values. You're probably going to do absolutely nothing and be relatively unaware of what you're doing or why you're doing it. And at the end of the hour, you may or may not even have the system of self-reflection, which is the system of asking, how am I doing? How am I doing compared to what? Compared to these other things I could have been doing, these other things I could have been thinking. So without any system, there's a lot of unconscious instinct and very little analysis, because thinking itself is a system. An intelligent system is going to extract conscious high yields out of that situation that when you analyze them in relationship to other systems of thinking. For example, one system of thinking could be the law of empathy. The law of empathy, one of the implications of the law of empathy is that whoever is in the most pain gets the attention of the group. Why? Because one of the interesting parts of the law of pain is that it often takes less energy to reduce excruciating pain than it does to take high levels of well-being up by the same degree. And if you look at, for example, the income well-being curve. So, for example, Sonia Lyubomirsky in some of her work study on happiness found that as an American citizen goes from $0 to $70,000 per person, there is a massive increase in well-being and happiness as they are able to pay their medical bills, pay their food bills, pay for housing, feel safe and secure with that income. But as you go from $70,000, well, let's say your happiness goes up 300%. As you go from $0 and dependency and homelessness to $70,000 and independence and comfort and security. So you might have, let's say, 300 to 500% increase per individual, going from $0 to $70,000 per year per capita. Now, as you go from $70,000 to $140,000 per year per capita, you've got double the expenditure of energy, of money, but you do not see double the well-being. You might see a 20% return on investment going from $70,000 to $140,000. You may actually see inverse yields as greed sets in and one moves beyond the focus of simply surviving and being secure into what all can I do? And then, of course, it's not enough money, so you need to go more. So you go from $140,000 to $300,000. And again, the yield may be less per year than it was before. Maybe at first there's a hedonic adaptation curve where you go out to, maybe that's enough to start traveling or whatever, but then, the body quickly adapts. The $70,000 Mercedes that was so amazing the first time you went there and thought, well, suddenly you're not paying attention to it because you're looking at the Bentley in front of you and salivating over this. And so what you see is a curve of diminishing returns. That your highest yield, if you're looking at a planetary level of well-being, your highest return on investment is going from insecurity and trauma to independent self-sufficiency in food, shelter, medical, and safety, with a sense of dignity. You've got a tremendous return on investment. And so, for example, if you've got 10 billionaires sitting in the circle, and you've got 10 homeless people sitting in the circle, and you want to increase the net well-being of the circle, each of the 10 billionaires hiring or giving or teaching or whatever each of the 10 homeless people to have that $70,000 a year would see an immediate 300% to 500% return on investment for the homeless individuals. It would not see you wouldn't see a 300 to 400% decrease in the billionaire's well-being. Their well-being might actually go up, because one of the problems that you have once money reaches a certain point that has nothing to do with survival, security, love and belonging, or self-esteem, and is actually serving as an excuse to not develop one's talents and to become an addict and not bring more gifts into the world, but just to addictively accrue more money, you might actually see an increase in meaning, an increase in transcendence in the sense of the billionaire, and actually have mutual increased well-being. So this would be suggested by the law of empathy. This is a system. It's a system that says that in order to move from the sociopathic system of the brain to the empathic system of the brain, you have to go through the ritual of treating other people like you would treat yourself. That if you will treat other people like yourself, practicing the law of empathy, you will create survival, security, love and belonging, etc., more efficiently than if you treat other people like enemies. And if you treat them like yourself more efficiently than otherwise, you will create a more complex system of partnering, of collaboration, of synergizing, because you don't get synergies from fear. You can get abuse synergies, but you don't get vision synergies and stuff, because everyone's focused down in a fear-based system. So the law of empathy suggests that those who have more safety, more food, etc., sharing with those who have less, increases well-being. This may not be the inclination of a billionaire, but it's a system of thinking. And it's a system of thinking that leads to statistical consequences. And so the first thing in terms of a criteria of a useful system is that it increases the statistical well-being for all involved in the system. Because polarizing well-being, for example, a winner-take-all capitalism where the rich get super rich and the poor get super poor, creates violence. Meaning, there has never been a time in the history of humanity where 1% or less of the population behaved sociopathically towards the other 99% indefinitely, and the 99% got more and more painful and the 1% got more and more pleasurable or hedonistic, whatever, without empathy. Meaning you get revolution, you get executions, you get beheading, you get revolt, you get rebellion, you get looting, you get cursing, you get, blaming. There's never been a time where an increasing disparity resulting in trauma for a majority did not result in a revolution of some kind. What is a revolution? It is a turning of the system. It's a flipping of the system. And so a workable system has to improve things for everyone. It's not always proportional, but if a system improves things for person A 10%, improves things for person B 5%, improves things for person C 200%, improves things for person D 100%, that is a system that is useful. For what? For improving sustainable well-being. So sustainable means that everyone's statistical well-being in the circle goes up, because otherwise you have violence and civil war. And even if the disparity is huge, like one person's well-being because of a system, whoever is sitting in this position, their well-being goes up 10,000%, and whoever is sitting in this part of the system goes up 2%. That's not going to be a very sustainable system. And you can look at it as a bicycle wheel. Do you want all the weight, all the energy to be concentrated in one point of the wheel? So if you are a bicycle wheel manufacturer and you're trying to create grace, that's the end goal. Grace. Flow, life, well-being with ease. That's grace. If you're trying to create a graceful ride on your bicycle, do you design your mold for the cast aluminum bicycle rims so that most of the aluminum is concentrated in this tiny little point in the wheel, and that every other point of the wheel is skimpy to the point where it's going to fall apart? Of course not. Because you put weight on that bicycle wheel and it collapses in this part, collapses in this part, and it's too heavy in this part. It's not graceful. So grace comes with an even distribution of weight, of energy, of material. You take your car tires into car for balancing, and what they do is they spin the tire very fast and they see where's the imbalance in the system, and then they take a weight away, a bit of lead away, or they add a little weight. Now, why would you add a little bit of dead weight to your car? Because your mileage actually goes up if the wheel spins perfectly symmetrically. Now, this is a perfect system within the paradigm of transportation. The worst system in the world is you cut the wheel in half and leave half of it off, then you heavily weight a portion of the half, and you build it too flimsily on the other side, and the system collapses. So, as a species, we are constantly experimenting with social systems. And the systems that are resilient and intelligent deliver higher yields of sustainable well-being per unit of energy invested than any other system available. That is the most intelligent system that we're capable of generating at that time. Now, the other thing that you can look for as a criteria for systems is this full circle dynamic. Remember, the sphere, the circle, is the most graceful shape in the universe. It unites the masculine and feminine in the paradox of the one and the infinite. The up and the down, the black and the white, and the one. It is a graceful, paradoxical, unifying, elegant system. So not surprisingly, in an elegant ecology. Elegant systems mirror the 10, 20, 30 billion year systems that we have around us. So we see the Earth as a sphere. Why? It's more graceful than being a square. The moon is a sphere. Why? It's more graceful. It's more elegant in its revolutions. And if you understand the fractal nature of systems, and you understand that nature is in the business of producing intelligent, sustainable systems, then the first thing you look at is that a system will be more graceful the more complex it is. Not just complexity, but symmetrical complexity. So if we take a square inside a circle, the circle is the one, right? But we can't deal with that because it's not distinct enough. So we break it down into 4 points. The 7 Habits quadrant of behavior is a good 4-point system. So you take all time and you divide your activities into 4 quadrants. And you have, on the one hand, important things and unimportant things. And on the other hand, you have urgent things and non-urgent things. And so the first thing to focus on within this system is important, urgent things. And the next thing to focus on, that is the most neglected part of the system, is non-urgent, important things. And where people tend to get sidetracked in that system is in urgent, unimportant things. Some stranger sent you an email this very moment, and they want a reply this very moment about nothing that has anything to do with your whole system of well-being. Do you ignore that email and focus on something that is important and not urgent, such as your bucket list, the things you want to accomplish before you die that no one's ever going to nag you about, but that could determine 30% or 40% or 50% of the value of a lifetime? If you get these things done before you die, your sense of accomplishment and your well-being and perhaps your post-life experience will be meaningful. If you don't, you won't. And they're not urgent. The email is urgent and non-important, not urgent, and very important. So this is a system. That's a 4-point system within a sphere. Now, it's good because I actually remembered it. That's the power of that system. It's not that it is the most complete or complex system out there. It's not that it necessarily delivers more well-being than any other system, but it increases well-being in the long term. And it also, its biggest value was that I remembered it 20 years later because it was only 4 points. But if you go into that dynamic with the bicycle wheel, a 4-pointed bicycle wheel, while being much smoother than a triangular wheel to drive forward in life on, is a bumpy ride. If we could make it into an octagonal system, if we could increase the distinctions in that schedule to an octagonal dynamic, for example, that 4-point system of urgent and not important, urgent and important, not urgent, and very important, and not urgent and not important. If we brought in other dimensions and integrated that into that system to make it an 8-point system, one, my RAM might forget it more, but secondly, the yield of that system could go up double. And here would be a good example. If you're focusing 80-90% of your time on a job that you don't like, and you're neglecting your family, and your paradigm as a Western male is that you're only as valuable as your money and your prestige, and so this is reinforcing an asymmetry of time meaning all your effort is going towards this job you don't like. Well, if you brought in the distinction in that 4-point system to look at the arenas of your life that matter, and give some context of, what do people mention on their deathbed and stuff like that, well, then you understand that your family is really important. So something that is not urgent and not important with your family may bring more symmetry to an imbalanced system based on chauvinism, the emphasis of masculine productivity over subjective experience, and thus bring more net well-being than doing something not urgent and important at work that would bring your ratio of work to other things from 80 to 85%. You see, and so so if you symmetrically and intelligently increase the design of your system, you get more grace. And by the time you've got about 100 different dots on your wheel, you don't generally, if rubber is connecting them, you can't generally tell that much what your, the difference between a 100-point system and a 1,000-point system. So, but there's a point where it really feels like a graceful flow. Now, the other key metric or criteria for an intelligent system is that it completes a full circle, that we're not looking at endless continuums or extremes. So what do I mean? Well, you look at the birth cycle. So something is born, it expands, it dies. Something is born, expands, and dies. No energy is created or destroyed. All energy is transformed. So you have a plant, for example. It's born, grows up, it dies, it fertilizes the next plant as it decays, as its energy becomes released as nutrients in the environment, and a new seedling is born, grows, and dies. This is a revolution. In a bicycle movement, if you follow a single spoke, it goes up, goes over, goes forward, goes down, goes to the bottom, goes back, goes forward. It completes every stage of a revolution. So within any paradigm, for example, if you're working with an effective system of color, it doesn't just get lighter and lighter and lighter indefinitely. No, it gets lighter and lighter and lighter, and then gets darker and darker and darker till you have the pinnacle of the light and the dark, and everything in between. And everything in between. So life, an effective system, mirrors life. Life is an effective system because nature has succeeded at increasing the complexity and diversity of all that is for billions of years. That's pretty impressive. No human being has done that, and many human beings and cultures have, through faulty system design, pursued an extreme to a point where it collapsed and they destroyed what they were trying to do in weeks and months and hundreds of years. So human systems are not generally as competent as natural systems in the metrics of intelligence, meaning that they deliver more sustainable human well-being than many of the natural systems. So, one, you want a system that is symmetrically complex, moving towards more complexity while still staying graspable. Meaning you've got to be able to relate to it, which usually means a technology like writing it down. You can, for example, I recently created a system of goals where I took 35 drives, 35 areas of my life, and then put a key goal in each of those 35 areas. Now, I can't rattle off what those 35 areas are because a 35-dot system is too complex for my memory without a lot of repetition and practice, which I haven't done. I've just looked at this document 5 or 6 times. So that's the benefit of the 4-point system. After 20 years of reading 7 Habits, I pulled it up from somewhere, and it's like, okay, that's the system. It's 4 points. But it's crude. Now, my 35-point system of goals is more complex. It's more circular. It covers more nuances that are important to me in my life. So it's a better system. It's a more graceful system, except I can't remember it. So you use the technology of writing it down. You use the technology of an app. You use the technology of a laptop, of a calendar that reminds you of all these things that take some time to memorize. So complexity is good. Balance and symmetry increases sustainability. But it's important to understand that for motion, like a bicycle wheel that's going forward, the wheel is the most graceful shape in the universe to transport energy. The circle, the sphere. However, there are asymmetries. You lean onto one leg as you're walking. You're moving towards a circular motion. This is circular energy as you're jogging or walking. But you're at any given moment, some part is out of balance in order to create propulsion forward, to create change. So the key question, since all life is a process, a kind of a process of leaning forward, is to lean towards symmetry. So, for example, if you're jogging somewhere, jog to a place that by arriving will round out your life, will complete missing pieces. For example, if you've got lots of money, lots of power, lots of this, but you have no blood, well then, if you're going to move towards something, move towards a hospital that dispenses blood. Because when you have a little less money and a little bit more blood after that interaction, you've overall rounded out your system. Because having too much of anything and too little of anything becomes toxic. And that's the grace of the sphere. The more imbalanced we become in certain areas, generally the more painful the life. Because driving a triangular wheeled car is a very painful drive. Driving a square wheeled car, pretty painful. Driving a 12-sided rubber-coated wheel, starting to get relatively normal. You could get used to that. People got used to, horse and drawn steel wheels on cobbles. That was a bumpy ride. By the time you've got a 12-point system that you're flowing through pretty organically, it's going to feel pretty graceful relative to all the crude systems, that we've got out there. So all life has an inhale and an exhale. That's part of the system. That's the wheel of breath, the inhale and the exhale. The wheel of life is the birth, maturing, and dying. The birth, maturing, and dying. The education process, the education system, you start off knowing nothing. You learn more and more and more and more and more and more, and then you realize you don't know anything. And that completes your education. You come back to the place where you began and know it for the first time. It's an effective system. You focus on selfishness, right? So the system of selfishness. Well, what's a selfish person want? Well, a selfish person wants to increase their sustainable well-being and avoid their sustainable suffering, their chronic suffering. Isn't that what a selfish person would want? I mean, no one who's selfish tries to suffer. A selfish person, what do they want? They want to selfishly feel sustainably good. And they want to avoid feeling chronically bad. Okay, so how do you go about it? Well, I want what's best for me, right? So I want comfortable clothes. Okay, that's selfish. Good. Your well-being goes up over uncomfortable clothes or no clothes in the snow. And so you want the best clothes. Okay. You want the best food. Okay? You want the best operating system, education, something? I mean, do you want to bumble around and not even know the names of things? Or do you want a great operating system? Okay, so you've got a great operating system, whatever it is that your education protocol is. You've learned how to navigate. Do you want lots of wonderful pleasure and sex and delicious food? Sure, so you have a good diet and stuff. Do you want to be fat and sick? No, so you have to get healthy, right? You have to learn what, doing this and doing this. You have to have a system with your body. So you're going to go out and completely selfishly become highly healthy, very happy. Do you want to be miserable if you're selfish? Of course not. You want to be happy, so you're going to do that. So how are you going to be happy? You're going to fulfill your human needs. So what are your human needs? Well, you got to survive. You got to feel security. You have to develop sense of love and belonging. You have to get self-esteem. You have to develop your gifts. See, people need to do that. It's boring just feeling like I can't do anything. I want to be good at something. I want to matter. That's a human need. I want to develop my gifts. And I don't just want them to be locked in a box somewhere. I want people to know my gifts. I want to bring them out. I want to see them in action. I want to be recognized. The human need. So, and then I want to be part of something bigger. Little egotistical me, it's boring. It's boring. I want to be part of something bigger, a planetary effort. Why? For my happiness, for my satisfaction, for my increased well-being. And it's no fun to be around miserable people. Emotions are contagious. So if I'm happy and I want to be as happy as I possibly can, and I'm surrounded by Luddite, miserable, depressed, uneducated human beings, I make a joke, nobody laughs. That's terrible. No one's laughing at my joke, right? Because they're worried about famine, they're worried about disease, they're depressed, they're traumatized. This is miserable. Who's laughing at my jokes? You see, there's a hierarchy of needs, so I've got to help them get their foods and I've got to help them to develop survival and security and love and belonging and self-esteem and develop their talents. Because then they'll be intelligent enough and present and have space to look up from their traumas and enjoy my jokes, right? Because I'm a selfish person. So I've got to ensure that I'm surrounded by happy people so that I can be happier, because that's the technical, viral nature of reality. So the most selfish thing I can possibly do is surround myself with incredibly competent, happy individuals in sustainable, healthy relationships with their body, one another, their sexuality, their finances, the ecology. Now, do I want to live in a dump, in a junkyard, filled with toxic chemicals? No, I'm selfish. I want to live in a beautiful green pasture. I want to live this. I want this. I want to be able to drink water wherever I want. So in other words, see, this is the point of any competent system. The most selfish thing that I could possibly do, which is to create an entire planet of happy people in a sustainable, clean, beautiful environment where I get all of my needs met in an abundance of opportunity to do so, which means that everyone else has an abundance to get their needs met. This is the most exciting. And then the people who I want to be happy, who are right around me, you see, they're in connection with other people. And they're not going to be happy unless the people around them are happy. Because depression spreads like a virus. Violence spreads like a virus. Trauma spreads like the virus. And pleasure and gratitude spread like a virus. So if I want to be infected with these high states of resonance and well-being, I've got to surround myself with people who have high states of well-being. And if I'm going to do that, I've got to participate in doing so. Meaning I've got to help their well-being go up. If I poison their well-being and their well-being goes down, now I'm surrounded by miserable people and my well-being will go down. So if I'm truly, truly, truly selfish, I become the most altruistic person on the planet. And that's the point. That's how you know you're being truly selfish. People say you're being selfish. You're sitting there in your mediocrity, holding a grudge, watching TV, hitting back beers, ruining your health. That's not selfishness. That's a cop-out. You're not truly selfish, and you're not truly selfless, because both of those come back to the same point in the circle. If you want to be truly selfless, what do? Well, you help the whole planet improve their life, right? So you help this person be happy, you help this person be happy. Now, how are you going to do that if you don't have a good body? Okay, so I got to take care of my body so that I can be really selfless to all these people. Well, how are you going to give away money if you don't have any? So I've got to start a successful business so that I can give away and help more people. And how are you going to teach people to really grow their lives? Well, I've got to maybe hire them or become a teacher, which means I've got to study. You see, complete selflessness and complete selfishness are the exact same thing at different points in a revolutionary cycle. And that's a criteria for a competent system. A competent system will take you all the way around the loop. Meaning, if you truly understand the polarity of liberals and conservatives, if it's a competent system, if it's designed right, you will move through the revolution. Because you will say, I want freedom. I want freedom and liberty and rights for all. I want health and benefits for all. No greed, none of this. And then you look and say, okay, so how are we going to do that? Well, we've got to, we've got to create more wealth and technology. Well, how are we going to do that? Well, we've got to motivate in some way people to create more wealth and technology that will lift more people up. Well, how are we going to do that? Well, let's set a point system that says this is more valuable than this and that and the other. And how are you going to do that? Well, you got to have competitions, and you've got to see to motivate people to win, and the winner will get more what? More well-being of some kind or whatever. So you evolve a capitalist system in a competitive framework out of a natural desire to help people. But similarly, if you say, no, I don't want to help people, I want to have as much money as possible, or I want to dominate the industry, I want to have everyone do what I want them to do, or whatever it is, whatever is the conservative value, I want to honor the tradition. Well, you can't honor a tradition unless people are happy with the results of the tradition relative to the other alternatives. So you've got to evolve the tradition to keep up with the times. You've got to become liberal and respond. I want to grow the church, right? Well, if you want to grow the church, you have to continue to iterate the system of the church so that it yields higher levels of well-being than not going to church. Because as soon as you have a system where not going to church is a better system in terms of delivering sustainable well-being and eliminating chronic suffering than going to church, no one goes to church. It's like, how can you grow the church and say, here's our proposal. We want you to get up and drive to our building, which is a memorial to a 2,000-year-old dead man who's suffering. You're wanting to avoid chronic suffering. Well, how about learning that you should aspire to what you're actually avoiding? Being nailed to the cross, being misunderstood. Now, you want to be understood because it feels good. But we want you to aspire to be more like someone who was misunderstood. You want to feel good, but we want to aspire to feeling miserable as the Holy of Holies. And we want you to pay us money for this experience. And listen to something that's going to make you feel terrible at an awkward time in your free time. Sound like a system that's going to sustainably make you feel good and avoid making you feel chronically bad? No. Human nature has never changed. Every human being in the history of humanity has at some level organized every action they've ever taken towards this question: will it increase my long-term well-being? Will it help me avoid feeling terrible? If it does, that thing catches on. Period. That thing catches on. It may catch on slowly. It may be spun. It may be all kinds of political spins and agendas on it. But eventually, as people learn that there is a better way of feeling sustainably good and not feeling chronically bad, they switch to that way. That is dependable. That is human nature. And meeting your human needs, survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem, developing gifts, integrating those gifts abundantly, and becoming part of something bigger than yourself works. So at some level, everyone's doing that. At some level, everyone's doing that. So you want a system that goes full circle. That if you follow the one extreme to the other, you get the other extreme. That it completes a revolution. And that's a sign of a good system. If you can go from poverty to riches to poverty, if you can go from riches to poverty to riches, and you can navigate that whole terrain in a way that brings empathy and value to the circle, if you can navigate the full life process from birth to growth to blossoming to fading to dying, and you can go through that whole process with well-being, you've got a better system than a system that takes a very small part of it and tries to take it extreme. Like, I want to live forever, right? That's taking a circular system and turning it into a linear system, and it fails. Because nothing lasts. You're going against nature rather than learning from the circular nature of nature. So, any competent system does not interrupt the spiral, the loop, the revolution by overemphasizing any one part. Sexuality is not the end-all and be-end-all in romantic relationships. That distorts the full circle. Having as much money as possible, which is one part of a cultural evolution in a capitalist paradigm, does not bring more well-being. It brings suffering. Taking any part of the system and turning it into an extreme dogma resists the process of life. You can try it with breath. Breath is a system. Now, if you fixate on any part of that system and arrest the cycle at that point, and then develop that system into an extreme. Hold out the breath as long as you possibly can. That's success. Well, if you really succeed, you'll die. But if you push and push and push, and then you push and push and push, you've got it to complete just to stay alive. Your body will reflexively go back into the circle. So a true system of feelings includes every feeling with honor. There's no effective system of the color wheel that doesn't include red or black or green. There's no effective system of emotion that does not have an honored place for every single feeling, every emotion on that wheel. So that's part of a competent system. Does it look circular And is each part of the circle honored? So in the West, we have good and bad, white and black. White is good, black is bad, and we try and get rid of the bad, right? So we can see the suffering in that system, whereas in the Chinese yin and yang paradigm, they have a circle where they understand that the dot in the one creates the other. That you cannot have communication without a speaker and a listener. You cannot have an exchange of energy without a giver and a receiver. And if you're dumb enough to ignore the science and say that the giver is more important than the receiver, you haven't understood the underlying mathematics. So that's a dogma, not a science. So these are the criteria of systems. Does it improve well-being sustainably and decrease unnecessary suffering sustainably relative to the current system? Because everything is a system. Whatever we're doing, it's relative to what's currently going on. Secondly, is it more complex than the current system, but not so complex that I can't relate to it at all? If you go unconscious around the system, it's better to use a cruder, more difficult system than an amazing system you can't remember or write down and have no clue about. So you want to go towards complexity while staying conscious, while learning the distinctions. Thirdly, you want a system that completes a revolution, where yin becomes yang, where black becomes white, where up becomes down, where in becomes out, where selfishness becomes selflessness, where spiritual becomes material, where material becomes spiritual, where love becomes all that is, where love is nowhere to be found in this spiritual field filled with hate and fear. You want to have a system that has an honored place for polarity. And finally, you want it to be data, grounded in data. You don't just want to say, I have a good feeling about this. You want to say that what we're trying to do here, let's say eradicate homelessness, is we're measuring all the suffering caused by homelessness, and we're reorganizing the system of energy distribution in such a way that disease goes down, trauma goes down, criminality goes down, fires go down, shame goes down, and people feel like a human being is more valuable than the money they make. And if we do that successfully, and it costs $1,000 a person, that's a more intelligent system than if we do it successfully and it costs $1 million per person. Because if you try and eradicate all homelessness on the planet at $1 million a pop, the system falls down. But if you try and eliminate homelessness on the planet at $1,000 a pop, and in such a way that every person that was previously contributing nothing to the cult in any way is now contributing some talent in some way that adds energy value to the system, well, that's a huge success. If you can do it for $500 per person, it's an incredibly bigger success. It's twice as successful. So you want a data-based framework. And that's what we're looking for in the design, testing, and creating of systems. The last bit I'll just touch on is that because no conscious system, no system of distinctions can or will be perfect. You want a humility to an evolving system as opposed to a static system. You want everyone to understand that the best system in place right now is fundamentally flawed and always will be. And that's why intuition, empathy, creativity, and a movement towards evolution of the system is a necessary attitude towards dealing with the suffering that will persist in some sectors of every system. For example, capitalism is going to produce a certain amount of unemployment, a certain amount of poor people, and a certain amount of sociopathic behavior. It has done that, it is doing that, it will always do that. So capitalism is a system that's better than dictatorial, centralized communism, which does that to a greater degree. There's more suffering in that system. But you need to know that the system is faulty. So if you hang on to the dogma, if it's not capitalism, I want nothing to do with it, you may ignore opportunities to minimize unnecessary suffering and increase levels of intelligence that don't quite fit within the paradigm, that don't quite fit, but that work. They work precisely because they fill in the gap left by an imperfect system. And so humanity has always got to transcend the dogma of its systems.